The Curse of Cleopatra's Needle. The obelisk was originally made for Pharaoh Thutmose III in Heliopolis in 1460 BC. It was given to the British in 1819 by the ruler of Egypt to mark the victories at the Battle of the Nile and the Battle of Alexandria, and was erected about 60 years later on the Victoria Embankment. The needle is said to be cursed. Ghostly figures are said to be seen running towards it. People report seeing figures jump into the Thames beside the needle, although there is never an accompanying splash, and no body is ever recovered. And on a quiet night, eerie music or screams can be heard emanating from the stone. In the 1940s, a policeman was approached on a foggy night on Waterloo Bridge by a woman who was distraught, telling him that someone was about to leap into the Thames. She urged him to follow her, and he followed her to Cleopatra's Needle, where he did indeed see a figure on the parapet. He rushed forwards and grabbed the woman, only to find it was the same woman who had approached him on the bridge. And when he turned to look, she had completely disappeared.
The Coventry Street Vampire. Coventry Street is a short, busy street that links Piccadilly Circus and Leicester Square. On April the 16th, 1922, a gentleman was walking along Coventry Street when he fainted. The next thing he knew, he was in Charing Cross Hospital, which was then quite nearby, and he reported feeling physically and emotionally drained, and was told by the doctors that he'd been stabbed by something that had left strange puncture marks on his neck. Over the next 24 hours, there were 2 more victims with the same puncture marks, the same feeling of being drained, virtually the same story. Rumour has it that the police hired a vampire killer who claimed he was successful, and whatever happened, there were no more attacks on Coventry Street. The newspapers at the time reported it as a vampire attack in central London. A more down-to-earth theory, possibly, suggested that the men had been attacked as part of some kind of gang. They had gambling slips in their pocket, which is there are a lot of casinos in the area. Another theory, perhaps as terrifying and fanciful as a vampire, is that the victims were the subjects of an illegal drug trial. So there was a mad doctor running around London's West End stabbing people with needles. Don't know which scares me more.
Amelia Dyer, the baby farmer at the Old Bailey. The Central Criminal Court, known as the Old Bailey, was built in the 19th century on the site of the notorious ancient Newgate prison. Amelia Dyer was a baby farmer who killed many infants, possibly as many as 400. She was found guilty in May 1896 and hanged at Newgate Prison in June 1896. Mr. Scott was the chief warder at the time, and he accompanied Dyer to the scaffold. He said that just before she went to the hangman, she looked straight at him and said, "I'll meet you again, sir." Just before Newgate Prison was permanently closed, Scott and the other warders were toasting the old prison with a whisky in the yard when Scott suddenly remembered Dyer's words, for no apparent reason, and he looked around to see her face, gazing at him through a window in the door. On the day the prison was closed, the warders gathered for a group photo, and a copy of the photo was sent to each of them. When Scott received his copy, he said he saw Dyer's face peeking over his shoulder.
The Ghost Train of West London. At South Kensington tube station in West London, the ghost of a steam train has been seen. It was first seen in 1928. This was long after South Kensington had electric trains, electric lines, but of course originally the Underground did have steam trains running along it. And the train that's been seen looks very similar, has been described as being very similar to the very early Underground steam trains. So that first sighting in 1928, a passenger was getting off the last train of the night at South Kensington. He was the last person on the platform when he heard another train in the distance. He looked back and saw this ghostly steam train come through the platform. There was a guard with a peaked hat, and it disappeared into a tunnel. The ghostly train has been seen several times since then, with the latest recorded sighting in 2013. So keep your eyes peeled at South Kensington Station.
A ghostly door in Lambeth Palace. Lambeth Palace has been home to the Archbishop of Canterbury for 800 years. One of the 15th century towers at Lambeth Palace is referred to as Lollard's Tower. It was used as a prison in the 17th century. One of the doors leading up to what used to be the cells is said to lock and unlock itself on its own. There is a story that on one occasion one of the vergers at Lambeth Palace had volunteered as an air raid warden during World War II. He was doing his round checking the Lollard's Tower when he heard the air raid sirens go off. He rushed to get to his station, but found that the haunted door had locked itself. Despite his desperate attempts to unlock it, it wouldn't budge. He gave up and resigned himself to being locked in there until someone let him out. When the all-clear siren rang, he tried the door again, and it opened easily. It had unlocked itself. He reported for duty at his ARP station, only to find it had suffered a direct hit early in the raid. If he had managed to report, he may well have been caught up in it. The haunted door had saved his life.
The Field of 40 Footsteps. Behind the British Museum used to be meadows known as Montague Fields. One of the fields was nicknamed either the Field of 40 Footsteps or the Brothers' Steps. It's said that in the 17th century, two brothers fought a duel to the death, and both brothers ended up dying. Some say that they duelled because they'd picked opposing sides during the English Civil War. Some say it was over a woman. Whatever the reason, the two brothers were both killed during this duel, and it's said that the footsteps they made during this duel could never be erased. No matter how many seed was sown, how often the ground was ploughed, nothing would ever grow in those fateful footsteps. The footsteps have been recorded throughout the centuries by Londoners, often significantly more than 40 footsteps. In 1800, a chap called Joseph Moser went to go and have a look at them because he heard that they were being built over, the field was being built over. He did see footsteps, but he saw a lot of builders' footsteps as well. That's the last time the footsteps have been seen.
The Hitchhiker in the Blackwall Tunnel. The Blackwall Tunnel first opened in 1897. At the time it was the longest underwater tunnel in the world at 6,200 feet. At the southern entrance to the tunnel, kind motorcyclists would sometimes stop for a young woman hitchhiking. She always asked for a particular address in Leigh-on-Sea near Southend. If the motorcyclist agrees, the young woman gratefully climbs onto the back of the motorbike, only to disappear without trace as the motorbike goes through the Blackwall Tunnel. One curious motorcyclist actually tracked down the address his spectral hitchhiker requested, only to discover that years earlier a woman living at that address had died in a motorcycle accident in the Blackwall Tunnel in the 1960s. Some have suggested that the ghost only tries to flag down motorbikes that are going too fast to try and prevent any further accidents.
Fighting ghosts. The 14th century monastery of Christchurch Grey Friars in the City of London was badly damaged during World War II. It remains a ruin, but it's been redeveloped as a little garden, so it's a little garden now. Queen Isabella was the wife of Edward II, known as the She-Wolf of France. She died in 1358 after arranging her husband's murder with her lover Roger Mortimer. Queen Isabella's ghost has been seen in the church along with another ghost, that of Lady Agnes Hungerford. She was also accused of murdering her first husband and hanged at Tyburn in 1523. Both of the women are buried there and both of their ghosts have been seen. The two ghosts of the two women used to be seen in the church, apparently oblivious to one another, but it's said that sometime in the 19th century they noticed one another and they began to fight, apparently jealous of each other's beauty, but that sounds like a man's interpretation. A watchman who saw the two ghostly women fighting fled the church and never returned, not even for his wages.
The most haunted theatre in London. Most London theatres have a resident ghost, but the Theatre Royal Drury Lane is the most haunted theatre in London. The first theatre on the site was built in the 1660s, which makes it the oldest working theatre in London, so it's had plenty of time to gather spirits. The most famous resident ghost is the man in grey, who has been seen by countless witnesses. The man in grey is seen as a young man dressed in early 18th century outfit, with a powdered wig, a tricorn hat and a long grey riding cloak. He was once seen by 70 actors who were on stage rehearsing and watched the ghost walk across the upper circle. Unusually for ghosts, he's said to always appear in daytime and is most often seen walking along the upper circle where he disappears into a wall. Restoration work in 1848 revealed a cavity in the wall in the upper circle which contained the skeleton of a man with a few scraps of grey cloth and a dagger in its ribs. The body was buried at a nearby graveyard, but the ghost remained in the theatre. The theatre says that the sighting of the man in grey is considered good luck for a production and have refused offers of exorcism.
The Kennington Loop. On the Northern Line, the southern end of the Northern Line is Kennington Station. It's one of the reasons that the Northern Line is nicknamed by Londoners the Misery Line. So at Kennington, tube drivers are sometimes asked to disembark all their southbound passengers and turn around to go northbound again, which is if you're a southbound passenger, it means you have to get off your train where you've just got a seat and get on another crowded train. It's very annoying. There's a small loop of track for the drivers to turn around, known as the Kennington Loop. Drivers are not keen on it, partly because it's a very tight turn and they're left sitting in it for ages. It's just a bit annoying for the drivers as well as the commuters. Some drivers have reported hearing voices in their empty trains. Now bear in mind that tube drivers have cameras in their cab so they can see everything that's going on in the tube. The drivers can see that it's an empty train. There's no one there, so who is talking? In a much more sinister experience, some drivers have said they've been sitting in the Kennington Loop, hearing the connecting doors in the train behind them open and shut, slamming shut from the back of the train, coming towards the front of the train. And again, the drivers can see nothing but can hear this unseen thing moving down the train towards them. So if you are a Londoner, the next time you get a bit miffed that you've been chucked off a train at Kennington, spare a thought for your poor driver as they sit in a pitch-dark tunnel, hearing an invisible force move through the train towards them.